What the fuck did you do to stop it? Here's what he did to stop it. Nothing. You know why they did nothing? Because it's too fucking hard to do it. They're gutless. The reason this country in the West is in the shape it's in is because the conservatives who talked a good game about doing better didn't have the balls to sit there and fight and say no. This is why you have moms going to school boards to throw this pornography out. The reason we're winning in the United States, we're not depending upon a conservative elite who are gutless and feckless. We're depending upon mothers and fathers and school boards. We're depending upon working class people who are taking their extra time to go to precinct strategy because they said, hey, we're prepared to stand and fight and not let our country be taken. And that's what's important. Everything else is just conversation. You have to have the political will and the muscle to sit there and say, they can call me a racist, they can call me a nativist, they can call me a xenophobe, a sexist, a homophobe, all of it. When they get to that name calling, that means they've lost the argument and we're winning. You've got to draw that pus, you've got to lance the boil and draw that pus out of the system. And the conservatives aren't prepared to do that. They'll curl up in the fetal position because they're not going to be acceptable with the clubs. You have to get over, you have to understand we're unclubbable and we're fucking proud of it, okay? And we're going to save our country, and eventually leaders will step up in England and come to the forefront and save the United Kingdom.
You know, Nancy Pelosi sent me to a federal prison. She sent me to a federal prison as a political prisoner to do two things: to make sure that she tried to tamp down the power of this show, right? Tamp down the power of the show, and also to break me. Nancy Pelosi, take out your number 2 pencil and write this down. This show has never been more powerful. The voices behind it have never been more powerful. The audience has never been more powerful. And we're going to deliver a knockout blow to your progressive insanity on 5 November. And then we're going to secure the deal after that. And number 2, the 4 months in federal prison not only didn't break me, it empowered me. I am more energized and more focused than I've ever been in my entire life. And I can see clearly, just like in 2016 and in 2020, exactly what's going on here and what we have to do to defeat it. I want to go back.
That was Steve Bannon earlier today, kicking and screaming out of prison at 3:00 this morning. His daughter Maureen was there to greet him. Welcome back, Steve. It's good to have you back in the saddle. We missed you. America missed you. You're a voice that is completely recognizable as shots fired around the world. You have traveled on a national sovereignty tour, talking to countries around the world, telling them why it's great for them to be populist and why it's great for them to have national love of country, and why it would be so important for each country to want to make their country great. Well, that's what we're doing here in America. That's what President Trump stands for, and that's what you stand for in your Get Out the Vote initiative, and all the people you've supported like Steve Stern and others that have been working tirelessly to get out the vote does not go unnoticed. And Nancy Pelosi, take note from Steve Bannon. He told you to sharpen your number 2 pencil. I hope you certainly have, and perhaps you might stick that in your eye, because frankly, you can't see what's going on. So you really don't need the eyeballs that you got, beady as they are. You are blind to the will of the people. You are blind to justice, but justice is not blind to you. And we, the people, we're coming for you, honey. We are coming for you. Got a really good show for you planned today. Got a guest that's going to be coming in studio here shortly, but I want to talk a little bit about FEMA. This is a story that I broke couple of, I guess it was 12 days ago now, October 17th, I went live on X and I showed up at a FEMA camp, supposedly, in Candler, North Carolina. I politely engaged with the staff at the camp, including the armed security guards who really did not want to answer questions at the time. That video has been broken down and gone viral on number of platforms, reaching tens of millions of views around the world, frankly. And, you know, there was something clearly off with at least the beginning of the conversation, they did bring out a gentleman by the name of Josh Wirt, who has failed to answer my questions when he told me on camera live that he would provide me with the FEMA contract for, particularly when it came to the land that FEMA camp, alleged FEMA camp, is sitting on top of. Interestingly enough, FEMA was contacted specifically about that location and that camp. And the people that were spoken to in FEMA don't know anything about a FEMA camp there. So the plot thickens, as they say, or as the Shakespeare says, methinks he doth protest too much. So again, not making accusations, just a lot more questions with, frankly, what is going on with that location, with the structure that is being built, with the contracts that are there, and with the other initiatives that have been set into motion prior to the run-up of that, quote, alleged FEMA camp being built starting mid-October. Oddly enough, starting right after a natural disaster, one of biblical proportions that has never really, frankly, been seen, a Category 2 hurricane following mass flooding. Again, we know about weather modification technology. We understand the chemical compounds that seed clouds. They've been around for over 50 years. USDA is using compounds like polysodium acrylate. I'll have a special guest on, Lisa McGee, who's a lead researcher at Vax Choice, to break that down for you in the coming days. I'm headed back to North Carolina to take a look at more around all of this, because I think the people have more questions. I know I do. And we're not going to let it lie. We have an election coming up in just a few short days. Bannon just out in time to really turn up the heat and put the pressure on. But already 50 million Americans have already voted. We're looking at record turnouts in this country, and we haven't even gotten to election day yet. We're learning now that the United States Postal Service, which is not the same as the post office, which frankly acts like a court of record, particularly when you send chain of custody mail, like a registered return receipt piece of mail through that post office system, that in fact is chain of custody. So the fact that the Postal Service is a corporate entity gives you that veil of I don't want to say secrecy, but frankly secrecy, because they're not following through, thanks to Obama, who changed the rules and setup of the Postal Service, requiring them not to no longer image ballots that are being sent through the mail. So how do you know when a ballot has arrived at somebody's house and left somebody's house if you're not tracking it for chain of custody purposes? Makes it very easy to steal elections with fake ballots, does it not? These are, again, questions, not accusations, just, asking the questions. Why would you do something like that if you want to support full transparency in, after all, according to CISA, right? Chris Krebs, remember him, the most safe and secure election of our time, 2020. What a bunch of horse crap that turned out to be. So lots more questions there. So what is going on with this FEMA camp that I visited on October 17th? Why is it not showing up with FEMA as an operation that is sanctioned by them? What's really going on? We've also heard about cyber polygon tabletop exercises. In fact, the United States government was going to conduct a tabletop exercise on November 5th and 6th. And because of public outcry, they were like, wait a minute, why would we want to test the internet on the day that we're all supposed to be voting? So that apparently has been shelved. But there's rumor, and we're going to have somebody joining us here shortly, about continuity of government exercises performed in Washington, D.C. last night. So when you look at that and you hear, rumor and innuendo and the D.C. elite talking about a cyber 9/11 event, we've been hearing about this for a long time. Get ready, get, stocked with food and water and cash and everything you might need, because if the cyber, hack happens and things don't work, gas stations don't work, supermarkets don't work, electricity doesn't work, the internet doesn't work, well, you better be prepared with everything you need, because, well, you're not going to have access to anything. So when all this sort of stuff is out there looming, you got to start listening closely. What exactly are they trying to get at? Why is it that high-level military intelligence officers are actually being told to prepare for a potential major cyber event on or around the election day? Well, we have a geopolitical analyst and author, Brandon Weichart. He is joining me today. He's a national security analyst for national interests. He travels the country and serves as a subject matter expert for various military and business groups, where he speaks about how technology influences geopolitics and U.S. national security. He's a former congressional staffer who holds an MA in statecraft and national security affairs from the Institute of World Politics in Washington, D.C. You can actually follow him also on Twitter and X as We the Brandon. Joining me now is Brandon Weichart. Brandon, great to have you here. Thanks for joining me today. Getting a
Thanks
little
for having me.
all this information flying around. Glad you're here.
Yeah, I was just the reason I was delayed is I was on the phone call with some colleagues of mine that went a little long. We were talking about the prospects of a cyber 9/11. So this is something that is being discussed quite frequently now in the run up to the election, and the consensus is that basically something in the cyber domain that is significant might occur on or around election day is the quote that keeps being thrown around. I realize that it's somewhat ambiguous, but this is the nature of the information, and I'm just sharing it with people. Hopefully, it ends up being a nothing burger, but a lot of very senior people are now having these discussions.
Well, that is alarming because, again, this election has been, basically under attack by the establishment. I can't even just say it's the left, Brandon. It is the establishment. They are really, gunning to make sure that President Donald J. Trump does not return to the Oval Office on, January 21st, January 20th,
Correct.
2025. So understanding that, and then I'm putting this a little bit into the context, and I put these two subjects together, but this quote FEMA camp I ran across in Candler, North Carolina is of high import and concern, particularly when we just learned yesterday with a couple of phone calls from some folks I'm collaborating with that there is no FEMA camp, according to FEMA, at that location. Yet the land that is owned by that supposed FEMA camp is owned by Ukrainians. There's a number of Ukrainians. We have a nonprofit associated with. They're a trucking company. And then in speaking with Mike Landis, who was one of the People's Convoy organizers, and he watched that video I did, he's telling me, gee, Ann, it looks like some kind of perhaps oil or mining operation based on the equipment he sees coming and going in and out of that camp. And more that we dig, the more questions we have that lean sort of into that direction, in addition to, continuity of government and the potential for their tornado shelters that they're assembling en masse in this camp that also act like a Faraday cage and bomb shelter. Could it be some kind of hybrid operation that really is using the disguise of FEMA at this point? I'm just curious what you're hearing.
Yeah, we can't put anything past the regime. We know that, for instance, there is a lot of natural resources there. We know that BlackRock and other companies that have very deep ties with the U.S. government, they certainly have designs for the area's resources. We also know that sometimes a government agency that is public facing is actually not the agency we're interacting with. So, for instance, a lot of people love to say, well, I work for the State Department. I'm a contractor for the State Department. Usually means they're actually CIA. So similarly, this could be a FEMA flag we're seeing in front of a facility, but it's actually probably something else, something more nefarious. And I think you've highlighted, some of the possibilities there. I don't know the details for sure about what's going on in North Carolina, but I definitely would not put anything past the regime. They're definitely making big plays for mineable resources, both here and abroad. They're definitely preparing for something. And just to speak to the continuity of government operations, I was in Washington, D.C. last week, and I was basically there for some other reason, but ultimately saw flying overhead Marine One and a series of helicopters that looked like they were conducting continuity of government operations, which ultimately indicated to me that there was something going on. And then we look at these videos coming out from last week, and last night rather, and it looks like there were Blackhawks landing on the front lawn of the Capitol building doing their continuity of government operations. All of this is being done with a week before the election, which indicates to me that there's some larger planning going on. That's not the normal function of the government. They don't normally do this thing before 5 or 7 days before an election.
No, they don't normally do. This is the footage that you were talking about, in fact, that shows that you had Blackhawks landing. Did you speak to anybody that could speak to the authenticity of this as a real operation, part of the continuity of government, or
Well,
I mean,
no,
what can you tell us about this?
no,
'Cause that is-
I actually, like I said, I witnessed some maneuvers that were going on. I was not, that's not why I was up there. It just, they happened to be flying overhead. I noticed it was Marine One, and some of the other presidential helicopters out of Andrews. I know some people at Andrews who are seeing an increase in tempo there, operational tempo, but no one has come out explicitly and said, we are doing COG operations. I am sort of reading between the lines. That video looks, real. And it does seem like there is some kind of, larger COG ops going on, which certainly begs the question, why? I mean, you might say that, well, they're just trying to prepare, for all contingencies, and that's certainly something the government does do. But I've never seen in the run up to an election, a presidential election, this occur, not like this.
Interesting. Yeah, even this particular website, which, I want to get your take on this because I find this interesting that this website to me looks like a government shill website, U.S. Civil Defense News. Federal government preparing for evacuations of senior personnel from Washington, D.C. U.S. Capitol Police have just conducted an exercise with Black Hawk helicopters over the U.S. Capitol. This was a landing zone familiarization flight. The aircraft did not land at the U.S. Capitol. So, we've heard rumor about some sort of, mass casualty event potentially happening in Washington, D.C., and the need for continuity of government. I mean, that's been registered. I mean, that's posted in the Federal Register. That's nothing new that you need a continuity of government plan. But that being said, is this potentially, and if they're evacuating, to where are they evacuating?
Well, probably to Mount Weather, or the facility that the Congress uses. I mean, in that particular instance, it looks like they're doing congressional COG, so they're going to practice taking the leadership usually out to, I think it's West Virginia. There's a facility out there. I think it's out there if I remember correctly. The president will obviously be taken to Andrews usually, or be taken to the PEOC underneath the White House, depending on what's going on. But it is interesting to me, the kind of assets that are being used right now. And you do bring up the mass casualty event. And don't forget also, recently the Pentagon authorized the use of military force against American citizens, devoid of the enacting of posse, or the waiving of posse comitatus, which of course is the law that prevents the U.S. military from being used in a police action against U.S. citizens in the United States. So you have all these data points going on. And then of course there was Jamie.
Oh, I lost you. We lost your, unmute your mic. I think somehow you muted your mic. You've muted your mic, Brandon. Brandon, time out. Your mic's muted. I think you hit the button on your mic. All right, we'll give you a second to sort it. I'm going to actually pull up the most recent DOD 5240-01 that was recently directed by the Department of Defense, because that is what, in fact, he's talking about right now. He may need to go out and come back in. It just says your mic's muted. Either you pushed a button on your mic or no, they apparently don't want you talking. Is that better? Let me hear. Brandon, I think I can hear you say something.
Now?
I got you. Yep.
Okay. Sorry. I don't know what happened there. It just muted me.
It just muted you. That's probably somebody not wanting you to talk, but we were talking about 5240-01.
Yeah. So basically, and you take that and you throw that in with Jamie Raskin, the congressman Democrat from Maryland, and he was at Politics and Prose a few months ago in Washington, D.C., and he was talking about the need to prepare for, quote, civil war conditions, because as he outlined, he and his fellow Democrats, even if Trump does win the Electoral College vote, and becomes president-elect on January 6, 2025, he will be met with Democratic congressmen telling him that you do not qualify to be president and won't be sworn in because of your violation of Section 3 of 14th Amendment which goes back to January 6, 2021, where they're saying he started an insurrection. And Raskin's talking about the need to prepare for civil war conditions. So you have all these different data points going on. And the only thing I can do is sort of look at it and go, it sounds like the Democratic Party is preparing some kind of a coup or quasi coup to stop what is obviously going to be a major electoral victory otherwise for Donald Trump.
Well, if your assessment stands correct, we are going to see a major electoral victory. But the problem I see happening on the horizon right now is the fact that they've muddied the water with mail-in ballots using the United States Postal Service versus the post office. They're not tracking these ballots with images anymore. There's no chain of custody. I do believe that we're going to find out. I was just watching a clip where the supervisor of elections here in Palm Beach County, Wendy Sartori-Link, a DeSantis appointee, formerly a Dem, currently her flag's a Republican, but all the same. And she's talking about how, because our elections are, under a, it's considered protective, part of the protected infrastructure, national infrastructure. It's under CISA, which frankly is an overreach into the state-run elections, despite the fact it's federal. The states run their elections. So to be classified under CISA or CISA, however you want to pronounce it, seems to be a conflict of interest of the highest order. And she's also, talking about how, these elections are secure when we know they were anything but secure in 2020. That evidence is all over the place, and trying to get it into a court of record that will do something like perhaps the Supreme Court is going to be pending this United Sovereign Americans lawsuit brought forward by Marley Hornick and Harry Howry, where they're using civil rights as standing to bring in the evidence of election fraud, i.e. voter disenfranchisement. So I think we're just not going to get the answer on November 5. I think it's going to be protracted, but for how long, and how long can they disrupt, and how long will the government go and keep us in a state of no internet, no electricity, no whatever, right?
Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Now you can't hear me.
I can hear you now. It keeps cutting in and out for some reason, putting me on mute. Basically, no, that we will not have the final result in all probability on the election night. It will not happen. It could be 72, 96 hours. There will likely be multiple legal challenges, probably from the left, because the Republicans have done such a poor job of preparing their election integrity legal challenges, which they should have been doing for the last 4 years. They're not prepared for it. My understanding is that the RNC has been, they're paying lip service to preparing for election integrity, but they haven't actually implemented putting actual lawyers in large numbers on the ground in these contested areas. The Democrats have. So I can imagine they're going to try to slow down the vote counts even more with these legal challenges. The Democrats will. Furthermore, if there isn't a cyber 9/11 event going on in the country, or if it's time to occur right after Election Day, that could very well complicate the ability to actually count those votes. And, they could declare a state of national emergency and give the President Biden, and by extension, Vice President Harris, a lot of power they otherwise wouldn't have, that would allow for them to do God knows what in that time frame to resolve the crisis. So, there's a lot of maneuverings going on right now that we need to be aware of, because it is not going to be resolved on Election Day, and we are not going to have a clear-cut winner probably for weeks, if not months, after the actual Election Day.
So what does that put Americans? I mean, what kind of constitutional crisis if we don't have a clear-cut winner? Does that allow the current regime to stay in power until this crisis is resolved? Does this default to Speaker of the House? What happens exactly? Because at this point, from where I'm sitting, Americans are on to all the shenanigans. We know something is terribly wrong. That's why early voting has 50 million votes already cast in this country. I mean, we're getting pretty close to total votes cast on Election Day, and we are we're a week out now. So where does this leave us? This is uncharted territory. I mean, it could be that, God willing, the worst case scenario doesn't happen, and somehow we can muddle through and Trump comes out ahead. But the scenarios that I'm looking at right now are, it's going to be a heavily contested election across the board. If there's a true national emergency like Cyber 9/11 that I'm thinking it might be, the White House will tamp down, and they will control the environment.
for national security purposes. And who knows how that ends, if it ends. I mean, technically, look, the Biden administration, regardless of who wins, Joe Biden is president until January 21st or January 20th, 2025. So it might be that they're going to run out the clock and then hand over power at that point. But it's going to be chaotic in between. It's going to be very unpleasant.
Okay, well, unpleasant. So, as an expert and an analyst on this and the circles that you're running in, can you give us any sort of perhaps, glimmer of hope that there are good guys inside these, intelligence operations, intelligence agencies that are aware of what's happening? They know who the bad actors are. For instance, I'll just give you an example. Last week, Patrick Byrne came on the show and he explained in great detail how they know exactly how Smartmatic operating system was flipping votes inside of the various voting machines, whether it was ES&S, Dominion, whatever. They're onto it. They let the bad guys know that they're onto it. They've told Cuba, Venezuela, and anybody affiliated, including members inside our own government. We know how you're doing this. So don't do it because we can stop it. Are there people like that? Somebody in the shadows, maybe?
Look, I mean, the people who are saying things to me, I get the sense are not people who are in on these, schemes to undermine our democracy, our republic. The intelligence, the IC, the intelligence community, the DOD, this is almost, I think it's like 2.5 million people work for the bureaucracy. It's not a monolithic entity. A lot of them are conservatives or nominally conservative. I'm on a thread right now with a group of mid-level people in the government who are fire-breathing Trump guys and girls, and they're doing what they have to keep their heads down, but they're not going to let this thing get out of hand. And so there is a group of people who, they're us, they're like us, and they believe like we do. The question is, though, are those people empowered enough to actually intervene? And I don't know. My hope is that they will. My hope is that, the difference between now and 4 years ago, the big difference, Joe Biden, because of COVID and because of the uncertainty of that era, Joe Biden actually did have real momentum going into the election. Now, maybe not enough to have won fair and square, but it allowed for the manipulators to basically manipulate things just enough to manage the perceptions of enough Americans to convince enough people that, Joe Biden really did win. Now it's not the case. That Harris doesn't even look like she's winning. In fact, the Democrats are imploding everywhere you look. This is why they've reverted to the Trump is literally Hitler, meme. It's all they've got. And if you look at that, you say, well, the hope is that there's the manipulators on the left realize they can't even rig this thing without it blowing up in their face. And so now they're going to be in a position where, are they going to pull the trigger on what is really the nuclear option, stealing the election in a way that is so obvious, or are they going to grin and bear it for the next 4 years and try to undermine Trump the way they did in his first term? My hope, my hope is that it's going to be the latter, that they're just going to have to swallow their pride and their evil plans and basically kind of, resist from within. And AOC already kind of made mention of that, right? And in that recent interview she did with Tim Walz, she talked about how, we don't want to have to go back to the resistance again, but we will if we have to. My hope is that that's what it goes to. It's going to be a nuisance at that point, but I think it's better for the country rather than have this chain of horrible events. So that is sort of the glimmer of hope, I guess.
Well, I mean, at this point, Brandon, how much longer are we going to continue with the charade of this federal corporatocracy? Because it isn't a republic we're dealing with. We're dealing with an actual corporation.
Right.
28 USC 3002-15A, the United States is a federal corporation, and it is treated as such with Dun & Bradstreet. All these agencies are, and they have just become, they are beholden to their stakeholders and their stock, the people that are invested in these companies that support these federal corporations, these agencies, that you and I didn't choose those people to stick COVID shots in 5.5 billion arms around the world and lie to the public about what's in these shots. I mean, it's been literally a genocide operation at the behest of the United States government, and it's the military industrial complex, it's the international bankers. this has got to like end. I mean, it's got to end cold turkey, sort of like an alcoholic. We have got to get off this train.
Yeah, that's the hope. And I think that there are some people who are now shifting, like Elon Musk, and even it looks like maybe Jeff Bezos a little bit. So some of the people who stand to lose if the money train stops are starting to realize for their own self-preservation, they need to get behind Trump. Who knows what that means in the long run, but I do think that if Trump is reelected, and I hope he is, I think you will see the real end of a lot of the gravy train, as it were. Now, maybe we get a whole new gravy train. I don't know. Oligarchs are going to oligarch, but the hope is that we will end Trump's already talked about this, right? He's going to end the federal gravy train. He's going to go after these public-private corporations that are abusing our rights. I believe that he will put people in who will do that. How effective they'll be is up for grabs. But the issue is we have a presidential candidate right now in Trump who's actually talking the talk. Hopefully he can walk the walk.
Do you believe that any of these cyber events that they're, potentially they're sort of ringing the cowbell could happen across our country? Do you believe these would come from within our own federal government, or would they come from foreign actors outside our government?
Well, that's the issue here is you've got a lot of sort of one hand washing the other, because yes, you have these foreign threat actors that I've spent a career writing about and warning about. You've got China, you've got Russia, North Korea, Iran, even Venezuela. And we see this with Smartmatic, and we see this with Tren de Aragua, if I can speak today, which is the Venezuelan street gang that has taken over our cities like Aurora, Colorado. Well, the Tren de Aragua gang is actually part of the Venezuelan intelligence system. They were actually created partly by Venezuelan military assets, and they're run through the government as part of their official drug running operation. So we have foreign threat actors, but a lot of those foreign threat actors are actually, they benefit from Democratic Party rule in the United States, right? You look at China, you look at the things that they've done to co-opt Democratic Party leaders, not just at the national level, but they'll identify these people like Eric Swalwell when they're lowly city councilmen or mayors, and they'll try to glom onto them and help push them all the way to the national level so that the Chinese government then has access and leverage over these leaders. So that a lot of these enemies that are operating against us actually have shared interests and shared goals with the U.S. Democratic National Committee. And so that's why I say, the Cyber 9/11, it could very well be China doing it, but the Democrats will benefit from that immensely. And that's part of the reason why a foreign threat actor like China would do that.
Right. What about the Office of Inspector General when it comes to the, cyber intelligence community and our critical infrastructure? We've been hearing about reports that it's actually started in the election integrity ethos about the council and the OIGs are really just basically sort of like the FISA court, rubber stamping the bad guys to go, give them cover, like they're actually, overseeing anything they might be doing that'd be untoward to the Constitution, to we the people. But clearly the OIGs aren't doing anything except rubber stamping more illicit and illegal activities.
Right.
Is this have to be overhauled from your perspective?
Yes. The expectation, though, that a federal bureaucracy will ever be able to effectively police itself devoid of outside oversight is a little ridiculous. These bureaucracies, if left to their own devices, will do what they're going to do. And actually, there's a great example of this during the Nixon administration, where basically Nixon was trying to rein in his own executive agencies, and they were stymieing him and basically plotted his overthrow with the whole Watergate setup. But again, it's happened with pretty much every Republican president since Nixon. The bureaucracy will do what it wants. So the idea of an OIG, an Office of Inspector General, it sounds great on paper, but they're not going to be effective. And even when you do have some sincere inspectors general, those guys, though, are rarely given all the access that they need. They usually face uphill battles from their own agency. They can't really get the information. Whistleblowers, for instance, are afraid to talk to them for fear of reprisal and for fear that that OIG office might be compromised, which it probably is. So you can go down the line. And so this idea that the inspectors general will save us, unfortunately, they will not. Only Congress can save us, and Congress is staffed by a bunch of morons right now. So, there's that.
That's one of my favorite words, Brandon, morons, because they are, but I think they're also evil geniuses that are sitting up there.
They can be. They can be.
Yeah. So, all right. So, what is the scuttlebutt maybe in the intelligence community about members of Congress, about any impending arrests, people they know that are clearly have broken the law? I played a clip yesterday. General Flynn talked about it on Joy Thayer's podcast last year that, he knows that there's members of Congress who have been compromised by, engaging in sexual activities with children and minors, not only here in the United States, but occasionally as well. So what is the scuttlebutt? Is there sort of a panic in DC right now that there might be pending arrests for some of these people? And will it potentially have to wait until there is a Trump presidency?
Well, I want to just make one thing clear. I'm only a consultant. I am not actually part of the intel community. So I don't actually know about conversations like this. I can tell you as a former congressional staffer that every one of those guys and gals up there, even the ones we all may like, are compromised on some level, either by special interests or, in the Democrats' case, like we were just talking about, by foreign interests. As for arrests, I don't know if that would ever really happen. I do think, though, that collectively Congress is for the most part scared of Trump returning, partly because they don't agree with the MAGA agenda and they don't want to have to be obsequious, which they will have to be if he's elected, at least for the first 2 years. They don't want to have to be obsequious to that agenda. They want the globalist agenda. And this is why, removing McCarthy and replacing him with Johnson was really a waste of time. But I knew that was going to happen. I knew that was going to happen because of how the dynamics of, I used to work there, of how the House works. Similarly, the Senate, McConnell is stepping aside fortuitously right now, so he can pick they can have basically a closed ballot to pick the next Republican leader in the Senate. It will not be somebody who is MAGA. We are not going to get an open ballot. And that is partly because of what you're talking about, the fear that if Trump gets in, there might be real push for real openness about what exactly is going on in DC. And there are things like compromat. There are things like, honeypot operations. You go to the Hay Adams at any given night and you'll find a bunch of Svetlanas looking around for their next mark. That's the way it works in DC. I would say 75 to 80% of DC is compromised, at least, either by big business or a foreign intelligence agency, or even.
Well, I think we lost your audio again. Looks like you back? I'm not sure. Brandon, I can hear you, but I don't think he can hear me. Something is going on his end, either with his earphones. Can you hear me? I don't think he can hear me. I'm actually just going to check the chat right now. I don't hear you. I can hear you now.
Yeah, I don't know what's going on.
You don't know what's going on? Well, I'm just checking Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. Well, the internet's going crazy. I'm actually talking. I'm not talking. I'm looking at the chat right now, just on Rumble. Yeah. And shout out to Swole Chihuahua's back here again. Thank you, Swole. Good to see you. Hey, Christy, Loco Sparrow. I'm trying to monitor the conversation here while you're talking, but I'm just want to look through this. Swole Chihuahua says we have millions of Americans with no money, no homes, no hope, no guns. Anyone can rally them and use them as a tool for liberty. Loco Sparrow doesn't want to go there. She likes the public forum for discussion. I think that's smart. Thank you, Christy, for reminding people to smash that thumbs up button. Swole Chihuahua says, I worked in intelligence. I know how they operate. There are a lot of foreign soldiers here now. Some will help the patriots and be able to supply them. The open borders works for us as well as for them. And I'm skimming through here as fast as I can to see if there's something I need to address, like a question they may have. But it looks like they are also concurring that the chat in here is a little bit awkward too. So apparently there's a lot of internet traffic today that's creating problems. So you're not alone.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, well, we're getting down to the wire, so I'm not surprised. I expect at any day now I won't be able to go live, and that'll be that. I'll be like, oh, vacation.
One of the you get out of the country. One of the people who was telling me about what they were seeing in the intel community was very upset that he was not allowed to go public. There is a group that very badly wants to warn people to prepare, but they are not obviously allowed to. And he told me explicitly the reason that he was telling me anything was, first of all, because I brought it up. And the way I brought it up, obviously I know something, and I do. Secondly, I am not bound by the same confidentiality rules that they are. So while I was not given explicit intelligence, I was given sort of the pattern that they're seeing, and he wanted me to get it out to as many people as I could. And that's what I'm trying to do.
Well, if you want to be as detailed as possible, if you were going to give instructions right now to your family, mom and dad, sisters, brothers, children, aunts, uncles, what would you tell them?
Well, the first thing I'd say is, for my family, unfortunately, we're still recovering from the hurricane. So if Cyber 9/11 happens, I think I'm damaged still from the hurricane. So I don't think we're fully prepared. But if you can get your hands on a home generator, if you can get your hands on, if you have gold, if you have silver, obviously, if you have firearms, that's always good to have. If you have the ability to get some canned food, if you have the ability to get your hands on a stockpile of antibiotics, if you have the ability to ensure that you have bottled water, some kind of consistent clean water access, I would start taking those measures. I'm not saying the end of the world is coming. I'm just saying, as a general rule of thumb, given the uncertainty of these times, you probably want to be prepared on some level. And if you live in Florida like I do, you have to be prepared anyway, because we have these horrible hurricanes. Right. Basically the standard kind of, maybe a little bit more detailed kind of prep you do for a hurricane, you probably want to do for this. It could be nothing. It could end up that, hey, the elite have decided it's too risky. We're gonna undermine Trump like we did in his first term, which was actually very effective for them. Because really they only have to hold Trump back for 2 years, because every president who only has this, in their final term, they really, the first 2 years are the ones that count. And then the back two are pretty much, he's a lame duck. So they're probably banking to some degree on that. I would say just, commodities, guns, God, guns, gold, water, canned food, just have it on hand. It's just good it's always good to have stuff like that on hand. Don't go crazy. Don't blow through your money on that, but build it up, and you can weather the storm pretty well, because eventually power will be restored. Eventually, because they don't they don't want us to be completely crippled forever, because then that doesn't serve their interest. It will be restored. It will be according to their timeline, though. But when everything comes back on, we'll be, materially, physically, we'll be fine. Spiritually, who knows? But yeah.
Do you think that the people who believe in God's guns and country are going to sit back and just wait for the bad guys who have potentially stolen yet another election, are prolonging the inevitable of a Donald Trump return into the seat of the office of the president? Do you think that people like you and me are going to sit back idly? Are we just going to go, okay, great, we're just run our generator?
No, it's a question. But it's a question. You asked what I would tell my family. It's a question of organization. I don't look. I hope it doesn't come to this, but I don't see I don't see any way that there's going to be some kind of pushback. Look at how many people accepted COVID protocols without question. Yeah. Look at how many of us, and I'm guilty of it too, after 9/11, accepted the Patriot Act and accepted, the TSA and the invasions there. So,
I was on that domestic terror list.
Right.
So I'm
it's
familiar.
So, I think we have a lot of well-intentioned people. I would also say, don't fall for the trap, that a lot of our elite want us to fall for, which is, to trigger a false flag, and then you can then paint the entire MAGA movement and discredit them as being violent. So there's also that issue of having, the attempt to sort of like what Julie Kelly talks about, the Fed surrection on January 6th, where there were
Right.
FBI informants within the crowd, and they were inciting people, to try to take these extreme actions so they could then get the images of the MAGA wearing people, so we want to avoid that as well. So I unfortunately, I just don't see any way that there's organization on the right to do anything other than hunker down and try to survive whatever happens. It's really up to Trump and his campaign to finish this thing. So
let's talk briefly about the book you put out. I had your X profile up,
Thank you.
Brandon on X, but you've also got a book out, A Disaster of Our Own Making. I think that the title is fitting. How the West lost Ukraine. I mean, we obviously made Ukraine out of our Maidan revolution and the CIA, Victoria Nuland in 2014, installing the puppets that we needed to turn that into a massive laundromat. There has been some information I've read that looks like when Trump is talking about China, maybe he's not talking about CHINA in as much as he's talking about a biolab in CHYNA. China, Ukraine. So curious, if you could comment to that at all, if you have any information on that, and plug your book for us.
Well, thank you so much. Yeah, the book, it's been described as a revisionist history, and basically I go back to the end of the Cold War, and I look at what was going on. Boris Yeltsin's Russian Federation in particular very badly wanted to be our friend. It was the first time, I think, ever that the Russian leadership was really gung-ho about becoming part of what we call the West. And the same elite who fought Reagan for his entire 8 years and mocked him when he said Russia, Soviet Union was going to collapse by the end of my term. That same group outlasted Reagan. And at that point, after the Soviet threat went away, after communism died in Russia, at that point, did that same group of Western elites suddenly become toxic Russophobes. And they began to embrace the strategy of, we're going to expand NATO well into Russia's backyard. Even though Russia was telling us, don't do this, we'll respect Ukrainian sovereignty, just keep it neutral. No, the ultimate goal was to absorb Ukraine so that we could push Russia's Black Sea Fleet out of Sevastopol in Crimea, which had been there since Catherine the Great's time. We wanted to push Russia after the Cold War back to its medieval era borders. And because, of course, those are indefensible borders, and it would have ultimately collapsed Russia into 4 or 5 smaller countries that we could have then exploited for all of the natural resources. And I talk about the plan. There are several think tankers who do not want to be outed as having been part of discussions with the U.S. intelligence community throughout the 90s and early 2000s, where they were discussing just how you collapse the Russian state and how you basically get rid of it as an entity entirely. And this is why when Putin says that they're trying to do to me what they did to Saddam and Gaddafi, he's not necessarily wrong. There is definitely a group of, and you mentioned Victoria Nuland, there's definitely a group of high-ranking people in the State Department and CIA and at the NSC who want to collapse the Russian state. And that is what Ukraine is really about, using Ukraine as the base for that. And it is an insane postulation, as insane as spreading democracy to the Middle East. And it's the same people, by the way, who did that.
It is. We came, we saw, he died. That was Hillary Clinton with respect to Gaddafi, right? And
you can't do that to a nuclear armed Russia, though. It's not the same. You can't do it. I mean,
it's not the same. And I find it interesting when you start to look at BRICS and the alignment of the Central Bank West and NATO, right? Versus the BRICS aligned countries that have come together, and they are, openly trading with one another. They are unrolling out their payment system. The BIS, Bank of International Settlements, is at, I think I just read an article this morning on Zero Hedge, where the BIS, the Bank of International Settlements, is trying to figure out potentially how to blow up Enbridge, right?
Yeah.
I'll put this up there so people can see what we're talking about. But Enbridge is the payment system, the connector for the BRICS countries. And if they can do that, they're going to want to do it, right?
And this is sort of the basis of my next project as I'm looking at this issue big time. And I will just say that I want to stop using the term BRICS. I would just want to use Eurasia. It's really a Chinese-led Eurasian alliance that includes parts of Africa and Latin America, but it's Eurasia is waking up and they are aligning against specifically the United States, but generally what we call the West. And actually, if you are familiar with geopolitical theory, which is what I studied in my master's, it's all I did under Dr. Linchowski and Mac Owens. What we learned is there are people like writers like Nicholas Spikeman or Alfred Mackinder. These are great geopolitical thinkers over the last 100 years who warned the British and the Americans, never let the Eurasian mainland, Europe and Asia, become a consolidated challenger to the maritime countries like Britain and America, because Eurasia is home to the world's largest resource base, largest population base, and they will overwhelm even North America in any conflict, whether it be direct conflict or some kind of economic competition. And what you are witnessing with the so-called BRICS alliance is the rise of Eurasia, led nominally by China, as a challenge to the U.S.-led international system that has persisted since 1945. They are winning, and it is dying right now, the U.S.-led order, so-called. It is dying in the killing fields of Ukraine because we created that disaster. It is destroying our industrial base, which is already broken. It is empowering rivals, and it is undermining the moral authority of the United States.
Yeah. Well, that's essentially what I've been saying for the past couple of years, that when you start to look at countries that are organizing around fair trade practices, which you have to start with sound money. I mean, Trump was able to beat back, the world into, I want to say, submission in the sense of there was world peace. And he used it using the hegemony of the dollar and trading directly, unilaterally with countries, not in blocks, like, the Trans-Pacific Partnership. He blew that up along with the Paris Accord immediately. But, when you start, negotiating with each individual country, you can now relate to them on what it is they have that makes sense for you to have, and you to swap with them. And you come in what's fair trade. That's what BRICS is doing, but they're starting with stability of sound money. And that's what we don't have in the NATO, Western,
and that's
Central
countries.
Yes.
That is the number one strategic threat to the United States. It's not China. It's not Russia. It's not even elements of our own IC. They're problems. The real threat is our debt, our national debt.
That's right.
$35 trillion. Although Cato Institute says if you include unfunded liabilities, it's actually $73 trillion. You don't
I thought it was like 200 or so. I've heard numbers between 2 and 400.
Well, I'm just going off of what I've seen, what I can confirm. Yeah. What I've seen is upwards of 73 trillion, and you can't grow your way out of that unless you start space mining, which is what my first book was about. But that's a long-term project. You can't grow your way out. And in the meanwhile, the federal government is spending and printing money like there's no tomorrow, further devaluing the currency, further empowering these Eurasian nations to say, we are not going to be dependent on this weak system. And then we're weaponizing the dollar by going after things like Russia's sovereign wealth fund. And the rest of the world, the global south that doesn't have nukes, is looking around going, wait a second, the U.S. wants us to rely on their currency, but even nuclear-armed Russia is not safe from their wrath. Why would we ever want to become reliant on their currency? We're going to do something else. And right now you see sort of a basket of different currencies being used by the so-called BRICS nations, but eventually that will grow into something more common. And we saw in Russia, in Kazan, the BRICS summit there, they presented Putin with a mock-up of a BRICS dollar, was what they're calling it. That is where they're headed. Think of the euro. Think of the EU having a single currency in a trading zone. That's where this is ultimately headed. It might take 30 years, but if trends persist, that's where it's going to go. And unlike the EU, this Eurasian Union will have significant staying power and will be stronger than the United States.
Right. Again, when you're based on sound money, you're not based on fiat, and it's just basically you're leveraging nothing out of nothing. but you
Right.
have the appearance that it's something. And eventually that, it catches up to people. The one thing the United States has always had is the full faith and credit of its people, which are resilient, and we produce when we need to, and we are innovators. Chinese, the greatest imitators, but we have been able to produce our way into an incredible storybook history. But now we're being used as basically debt slaves to continue to finance more
Right.
debt, more, and more slavery around the world.
And I would also, I would also just quickly say that the Chinese began as imitators, but they are, if you look at what's going on in their tech sector, this is what I usually spend my time talking about with the DoD. The Chinese in the last decade alone have really started to innovate in some key areas, and we're not innovating anymore. And that's because of the government. That's because the government is sitting with regulations. They're sitting on the innovator, and they're stymieing innovation in the United States.
Incredible. Just incredible. Well, Brandon, it has been an honor
Thank
and a
you so
pleasure to have
much.
you on. I'm really glad that you stopped by.
Happy to
I
be
believe
here.
yeah. If you have more information, if you feel like
I'll
you need
stay
to
in
get the
touch.
word out,
You've got my
stay in touch
info.
with me.
Yeah.
Yep. I will, we'll push out anything you have. I mean, at this point, we've got to take information, vet it as quickly as possible, and get it out. I'm waiting for some folks that, we were able to push out some information regarding surface to air missiles that actually stopped an operation, which was pretty significant, but there's
Well,
still
God
more.
bless.
We've just got to keep working. We've got to keep this stuff in the forefront, which is why this odd FEMA story, FEMA, not FEMA camp, whatever it is in North Carolina, we got to figure out what exactly are they doing there, because even FEMA doesn't know what they're doing there. So
It's the government again. So big, it's too big for its own good. Got to cut that thing down.
Got to cut that thing. I hope it's because it's too big. I hope it's not because it's operating as FEMA, but it's really not FEMA. I mean, somebody forgot to pass the memo of, hey, pretend we're FEMA when we're really not. I don't know. So anyway, God bless you. Thank you so much for stopping by, and we'll stay close.
Okay. I'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.
All right. Thanks. Tremendous, huh? That's again, somebody who stays very close to the intelligence community is, just kind of relaying what they're hearing on the ground. And again, all you have to do is look at the past, right? The future is proven out by the past. These people will love to tell you what they're planning on doing. I mean, these devils, these demons will always tell you what they're doing. Everything that I've talked about when it comes to your sovereignty and the fact that being a U.S. citizen really is nothing more than just handcuffs around your sovereignty is all rooted and all written in stone in their own U.S. codes. You can go back through the annals of history and look at congressional records. You can look back into 1868 when they decided to, quote, ratify under duress the 14th Amendment and turn you into a citizen voter from an American electing your public servant. We were all Americans from different states and what have you till 1868. And that was shoved down our throats to become part of the U.S. Citizenry Club and become a voter instead of an elector. And it did change the game. And now look, they're trying to weaponize Section 3 of the 14th Amendment to say President Trump was part of an insurrection when we know without a shadow of a doubt, and how many documentaries have there been, that it was a Fedsurrection on J6 2021, led by Nancy Pelosi and some very, high-level people inside the Capitol and the FBI, et cetera, et cetera. President Trump offered to provide the National Guard and all sorts of stuff, and was shut down by Pelosi, shut down by the D.C. Mayor, Muriel Bowser. And, well, what happened, right? You had a Fedsurrection. You had Ukrainians there also dressed up as MAGA. And again, Ukraine has been at the forefront with bioweapons labs. Victoria Nuland has even admitted to those on television, live, when being asked in a congressional hearing about all this. All of this stuff is out in the open. They're taking the masks off. And it's frankly up to us to go, okay, they're telling us what they're going to do. Now, what am I going to do to protect my family and to change this behemoth machine? Well, it starts by getting out and voting. It starts by electing President Donald J. Trump on November 5. But most importantly, it starts with you, the American people. You have to decide to engage in the local political machinery back in your house, in your home, in your county, state, town, whatever, and to gut it and clean it out. This corporatocracy-led regime at every level goes all the way down to the municipal level. Even your little town is incorporated, and that gives them a veil to hide behind and be, frankly, not personally liable for any of the nonsense. So it's a matter of taking down that corporate veil. And when we can prove they knowingly were doing things like they are in Sarasota, like we have election evidence, fraud evidence, we have them on tape now talking about stealing the election in 2020 in Georgia. With all this stuff, you have to now engage in massive lawfare. But remember, their machine on that side is much bigger than ours. What we have is the ability to not comply, to just say no to anything they want to do. And for those people that want to learn more about, freeing yourself in terms of sovereignty, just send me a DM on Twitter if you want, or send me an email. You can get my email address and my snail mail address in the description box on Rumble. Go there, and I'm happy to, to help you with any questions and direct you to websites that I think are really, really good in those areas of determining and ascertaining and just taking control of all jurisdictions of your life, including your sovereignty, which of course we all know God gave us that when he created the earth. So without further ado, I'm going to sign off. I'm going to head out tomorrow. I'll be on my way to North Carolina. Going to be looking more into this FEMA situation and other areas that of interest on the ground in North Carolina. Lots to unpack. We've been doing a lot of digging, a lot of research. It's getting a little bit interesting, a little bit crazy, in fact, with some of the things that are happening to some of the researchers that are on the ground in North Carolina. So it's going to be quite entertaining what goes on. So stay tuned. I'll probably do some lives when I'm up there. And with your support, hopefully we can continue to expose what the agenda is. I hope you guys have a great afternoon. God bless everybody. And I'll just play us out here to remind you, you don't want to be left without covering your wealth in gold. This election is filled with promises of tax cuts that will go nowhere. But don't let this excess noise blind you to what's really at stake, your retirement. As economic volatility continues to grow, few are talking about the consequence that could ripple through your retirement savings. Many wealthy investors have started preparing for the shockwave ahead. Have you? If you have $50,000 or more saved for retirement, click the link below or call 1-888-782-9064 and secure your free guide to gold IRAs from Augusta Precious Metals. Again, click the link below or call 1-888-782-9064.
Greatness doesn't discriminate. It doesn't see where you're from, what you look like, or who you know. Greatness is for those who work for it, for those who keep moving forward. Greatness is for anyone willing to fight for it.